Hello, everyone. I'm Mystery,
And I am Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator, and we are the Duality of Man.
and today we're going to be talking about some of the most vile and disgusting human beings on the planet. We're talking about the media.
I feel like that should be punctuated by some sort of dramatic, like, flash of lightning in, like, an old school Hammer horror sense.
Yeah, like
The media,
like a
dun
pipe
dun
organ sting,
dun.
like something out of Phantom of the Opera.
I think Eric would honestly be preferable to these people. For those that don't know, Eric was the name of the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera
Hmm.
book.
So, which part of the media do you want to talk about first? The news, movies.
I,
What do you?
I, I, I almost feel like we should stick to the news media in this one because
True,
art, culture, and movies and TV and stuff probably could be its own um episode.
true, true. So, the mainstream media, the news. Dear God, where to even begin? It's a shit show, and it used to be one of the prides of the populace that the people in power were being held to account, that there were people who cared about the truth enough to put themselves at risk in order to expose corruption and lies, and that they would tell the people the truth so that they could be properly informed when making decisions. And now it's propaganda by
Yeah,
their own admission.
then journalism became the property of the academic cathedral, and instead of holding power to account and seeking truth at all costs and actually doing that thing we call journalism, it became a means to hold the ground of the established order and to be stenographers to power and or the right people, quote unquote.
It's like that scene from Citizen Kane. The line, "People will think what I tell them to think."
It, and it reminds me of that one blonde chick on I think it was CNN who, when Trump started using the fake news meme more often, she said something to the effect of, "He thinks he can tell people what to think, and that's our job."
Yeah,
And I'm like,
it's a beautiful Freudian
according
slip
to
right
who
there.
and what impetus exactly?
Yeah. Just shows the absolute arrogance of these people. Just want to say, these people are no more intelligent than the average person. They're really not. Just because you go to journalism school or you're on TV, it doesn't make you more intelligent. In fact, I'd say that a lot of these people are
Yeah,
stupider than the
if
average
anything,
person.
it works in the inverse. Journalism school has gone way too Frankfurtian ever since the 50s, and we're reaping the repercussions of it, unfortunately. Because, like, I I I actually have an immense amount of respect for journalists. The problem being there aren't enough of them in the mainstream media to form a fucking game of chess half the time. Like in the independent media, you've got people like Tim Pool, people like um Andy No, almost said Andrew Yang there. That's a
The
completely
Epoch
different
Times,
story. Veritas.
Uncensored.
If you want to expand it out to kind of the commentary community, you've got people like Six Hex and Hammer, um, the Lotus Eaters, Razor Fist, all those guys. But in the mainstream media, I think Tucker might potentially sort of give a fuck half the time when it's not his team in the hot seat, but
Yeah. Also,
that's
a lot of these guys, they
skeptical.
let you know full on that that is their opinion on the events that are transpiring. They're not
Yeah, and
saying
they
that.
present the events first and then present their commentary separately. There is a very, very thin line that is about the width of a line of chalk drawn in the sand between commentary and reporting in the MSM.
Not only that, but they'll have evidence that they can point to, and they are more than willing to defend their position if they have to.
Yeah, and people of differing worldviews actually occasionally talk to each other sometimes, whereas even despite the long vaunted partisan divide between people like Fox News and people like MSNBC or CNN, they often operate kind of on the same um in the same worldview, in the same zeitgeist, and they take the same base premises for granted. So God help you if you ever disagree with those base premises. Like I saw a story recently about how I think it was um Mike Wallace um or no, it was Chris Wallace, his kid. Mike Wallace actually was a genuine journalist from time to time, but Chris Wallace left Fox News to join CNN, and you're telling me um there's no camaraderie between the journalist class, especially given the reasons he cited for leaving were basically, oh, but decorum and and civility and all these unity and all these aristocratic buzzwords of just trust our worldview, guys. It's the only valid worldview. Just trust us, derp. Instead of being willing to fight the powers that be, for lack of a better phrase, and find your own independent way of looking at the world. It's nope. This is the approved, academically endorsed narrative, and therefore that is the only narrative we will ever need, as and when we need it.
Yeah, and the worst part is that they act that the people are stupid. They act like we can't see what they're doing. You know, trust in the news media in the United States is the lowest it's ever been. And these people have the audacity to act like it's the people that are the problem. I believe it was Brian Stelter that said that one of the reasons that people don't trust the media is that there's a false idea that we're lying. It's like, you are lying. We can see you lying because we have two eyes and a brain and a memory.
Well, it's also the other thing of they don't even understand that they are lying. That's the other thing, because they came up in this in this journalist in this journalism or art school mentality of everything is relative, everything is subjective, everything is based on authority and consensus and derp 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 everything, the Frankfurt School ideology basically, although a little bit soft pedaled in the case of journalism schools, um, because they genuinely believe that, and that's what they were told to think when they were young adults first forming their identities as adults. They don't even know they're lying because they genuinely do think that all this aristocratic fluff is the science or the truth or whatever buzzword happens to be convenient at the time, and therefore the only reason anyone would oppose it is because they're uninformed. I,
They,
I, I, I say
it's
I say this all the
possible,
time,
but
and people think I'm giving them credit when I say this, but the importance of Hanlon's razor, never attribute to malice what can be explained by incompetence, is not because you should give people the benefit of the doubt that they're just incompetent and not malicious. It's because malice actually takes skill. Like, it takes skill to be a Long Fang or an Azula to make a Avatar: The Last Airbender reference. But in
because no,
actuality, most of the people in positions of authority in our civilization are not master manipulators weaving massive conspiracy theories. It's incompetent children who never grew up trying to keep people from noticing their hands are in the cookie jar.
I disagree because a lot of the things that they're doing, they can only be done if it's on purpose. Like there's a lot of selective editing in the news that we can see, like the
Ah, but
Trump video. The
That
Trump
can
video where he
genuinely
says that
be
there's good people on both sides, but they cut out the part where he condemns the neo Nazis and white supremacists.
yeah,
Like
but
that's preventing. You have to actively go in and do that.
that I chalk up partially to cognitive dissonance and partially to the concept of, and this is the other poison of modern day journalism, the greater good. I.e., if we let people see that, they might get confused and think there's two sides to this issue. And we cannot let them think there are two sides to this issue. So we need to get rid of it for their own good, don't you know? Derp. Because we are the parents and they are the children, and we are the ones who get to tell them what to think. That, you know,
All right. What about the
it's this elitist aristocratic stewardship thing they have of like, we are the people of the approved class, therefore we have a responsibility to the plebs who are too stupid to know the difference.
thing is though, like the Trump Russia narrative that they pushed, like they knew there was nothing there. I mean, they were caught on tape saying that it's a big nothing burger. They knew that they had no evidence to support what they were saying. They knew that they were just outright lying, and they still pushed it anyway. How is that anything but malicious?
The greater good, because they've declared that he is the wrong person, you see, and he represents or reflects the wrong worldview, i.e., a populist libertarian one. And that's an invalid worldview because of everything we learned in journalism school, don't you know? It's it it's part laziness, part incompetence, and part just believing that you are the moral superiors of anyone who is not you.
Yeah, this subject is very important to me. My mother was a journalist. She was a newspaper reporter for 20 years, I believe. I actually spent a lot of time in my formative years, like in the newspaper bullpen, talking to her and editors and other reporters, and I learned a lot from them. And
Mhm.
the fact that these people are taking something that is so important to our nation. Our nation needs people who are willing to go out there and tell the truth, who will inform people about what's going on, because we need an informed electorate. Because if we don't have an electorate that actually knows what the issues are and what's actually happening, you know what we get? We get what's happening right now.
Well, the good news is that the media, such as it is as you mentioned earlier, the lowest trust it's ever been in basically modern history. And conversely, independent media is becoming more and more trusted as time goes by. So it's not like the plebs and the peasants aren't informed; they're just being informed by different sources. But
But the problem
because,
is,
yeah,
the media
go ahead.
has a lot of infrastructure. They have a lot of access. It's a big club, and you ain't in it, and neither am
Yeah,
I.
the aristocrats.
They have access to the presidency, Congress. They have preference on social media, and they are able to collaborate to work together in order to set this grand overarching narrative that
And
it's very hard to break out of, because the people that oppose it aren't able to get as wide a reach as the people who are pushing it.
here's the optimistic portion of that. They have all this power, all this clout, all this networking, and they're still losing hilariously and incompetently. I
Unfortunately,
mean,
though, there are still going to be a lot of people that are still plugged into the matrix. There are people who are going to trust CNN simply because it is CNN.
I don't know. Cable is on the way out for one thing, and the demographic that does unquestioningly trust CNN like that is aging out. So,
Oh, but that's where the problem with access comes in. Like, say you hear about an event that happened and you want to look it up on YouTube. Well, YouTube gives preferential treatment to CNN, MSNBC, Fox News, and a bunch of the other mainstream news outlets, so that their results show up first, whatever you want to search
Hmm.
for information about an event that happened.
And then YouTube goes down in its credibility, and we're left with no choice but a paradigm shift. And that's the thing. The more they try to resist a paradigm shift, the more they're forcing our hand into making one. The times they are a change.
I mean, that's true, but these people, they aren't going to go down without a fight.
I have, sadly enough, I have more faith in the internet's ability to be strategic than I have in CNN or the establishment media's ability to do so. Because if they had any sort of strategy to begin with, this probably wouldn't have been an issue. But they don't. And unless we forget the alternative influencer network hit piece, or the in plain sight how white supremacy came for the Star Wars franchise hit piece, or any of
Or
the
the
other
intellectual
adjacent hit
dark web.
pieces.
You're
Hmm?
the intellectual dark web article?
Yeah. Or the this is how we fortified the election, but don't ever accuse us of fortifying the election thing from New York Times.
God, that one blew my mind.
Out of one side of their face, we totally did not do this thing and don't believe anyone who says we did. Out of the other side of their face, okay, we did, but it was for the greater good. Trust us, we knew better than you.
And I I hesitate to even bring up this topic, but the way the media has been going on about um, the virus that shall not be named.
The the virus, which is a bother, like so many other things that bother Winnie the Pooh.
Yeah, just you're not even allowed to have an open discussion about it. On they will shut you down for quote unquote misinformation. Meanwhile, the so-called trusted verified information ends up being disproven 6 months down the line, and the so-called crazy conspiracy theorist turns out to be true.
Yeah, because when you care more about validity and consensus and decorum than you do about substance and logic and reason, surprise, surprise, the people who care more about substance and logic and reason are going to be more accurate despite everything, because validity is just an authoritarian phantasm. It's just an appeal to authority. And decorum is another kind of authority, and consensus is another kind of authority. And appeals to authority are fallacious, no matter who is making them or why.
There's one thing I want to talk about in the media. Do you remember the push a few years back of the phrase toxic masculinity?
Oh yes, I think I think we're all still in kind of the middle of that push. I mean, they added it to the freaking DSM recent, or at least the APA treatment guidelines recently.
I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. Masculinity is not toxic. Anything taken to an extreme can obviously be bad.
Okay,
But
I, I'll play a little bit of devil's advocate with this. If you're talking about people whose obsession with being masculine causes them to behave or believe in toxic things, like, a Bluto or a Gaston type character, or, a Biff Tannen for Back to the Future type character, that's one thing. But if we're allowed to play that game and call those sorts of behaviors toxic masculinity, then we're allowed to call people like Helen Lovejoy from The Simpsons or Elizabeth Bathory toxic femininity. But
yeah,
the
but the
very
thing about
minute you say there's also a thing called toxic femininity, everyone loses their fucking minds.
say Biff or Gaston is that those guys are basically caricatures of the meathead male. Like even among jocks, you'll probably not find a person that's actually like that.
True. I'm not I'm not saying it's hyper common or anything. I'm just saying I can see a situation where this term might actually have some applicability, just like I can see a situation in which a woman using um her apex at the top of the moral pecking order, or her obsession with remaining youthful and beautiful and being able to manipulate people could also be considered a toxic femininity. But I'd per- I'd prefer a world in which we could talk about these things without putting a moral judgment behind it necessarily. But it is always used in a morally invalidating way. Whenever, especially in like fandom cultures online, the fans and the customers are not happy with their products they're being sold, it's always, oh, you guys are just toxic fans. Oh, you guys have just a toxic masculinity. Oh, this or that or the other. Oh, you just hate the women's. Oh, misogyny and this and that and the other. And it's like, or
Uh,
you could listen to the arguments and take them on board? Question mark.
we have a comment here from Nelson the gentleman. Elizabeth Bathory was stunning and brave. You sexist pigs. Those servant girls had it coming. They were just begging to be great. So basically, what he's saying is she was asking for it.
Apparently, and given that people like Germaine Greer and Eve Ensler can be feminist icons, and what's her name, the one who shot Andy Warhol by accident, fucking. Why is this so hard to remember?
Hmm.
The woman who wrote the Scum Manifesto, Valerie Solanas. There we go. Um, given that people like Valerie Solanas can be lionized, I I'm sure there are some red femme subcultures somewhere that think of Elizabeth Bathory as like an archetype of female power, which is kind of horrifying given that she inspired both the um, Bram Stoker incarnation of Count Dracula and the Grimm brothers incarnation of the Evil Queen in the Snow White fairy tale.
Hmm.
I
We have a comment from Ed Brewer. I'm told men and women are equal. Men are far physically stronger. What are women far superior in? That would equal it out.
manipu-
Maybe manipulation,
manip- manipulation and culture and um, being the head
organization,
of the moral paradigm.
organization. Would you say?
I'd say social cohesion and morality. Women always define the moral paradigm. It's always women and children first. It's always, if mommy ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. It's always, won't somebody please think of the children? Pearl, clutches pearl. There's a reason why that stereotype exists, and it's because Puritanism is more effective when it comes out of the tears of women than when it comes out of the blood of men.
Look, I feel we're straying a bit far from the main topic at hand.
Right.
Okay, so one thing that I want to mention is that we mentioned how a lot of people can be Puritans, right?
Hmm.
It just seems, considering everything that we now know, that the people who claim to be the biggest Puritans are also the greatest deviants.
Well, I mean, not to get too sidetracked again, but that is not new. I mean, the firebrand pastor who preaches the strongest against homosexuality is the one stooping the altar boy. The morally upstanding suburban mom is the one who, you know, her son has a crack habit or God knows what else, or it's always the upright, you will never drink or you will never smoke parents that end up with the children who end up as drunks and smokers.
Specifically, in the case of the media, I'm sure you're well aware of the numerous scandals that have been coming out, specifically after
Kitty
CNN.
fiddling.
Yes. and sexual harassment. And once is a once is an accident, twice is a coincidence, three times is enemy action. It's what, four times now? We have Chris Cuomo out for sexual harassment. Don Lemon is currently being sued for sexual harassment, and then two producers were have been found to be kitty fiddlers.
Well, it's just a matter of when you're the aristocracy, when you're the approved class, when you're the valid people with all the money and the resources and the clout, you don't have to deal with real world consequences because to you the real world is or can afford to be made into a social construction just like they all believe it is. It's a classic champagne socialism thing. Their
Yeah,
ideas work in theory because theory is all they will ever have to deal with because they're insulated from anything resembling either fundamental logic or fundamental reality or some combination of the two. And so, since they can get away with this shit, since they can get away with believing one rule for thee but not for me, they do. And the sad thing is, they probably don't even realize just how privileged they are.
yeah. I don't know. I read this quote. I don't remember who said it, but it was never trust a leader who is isolated from the consequences of his own actions.
Yeah.
And you got to think that's only what we know about. There could be a lot more behind the scenes going on there that
Well,
we just
and
don't know
lest we
about.
forget the Epstein, who totally did not kill himself, but we can't say
Yeah.
that on.
And the Ghislaine Maxwell trial happened, but unfortunately, she was convicted, but the records were sealed, and we have no idea who she was trafficking for or to. So those people, they're not going to be found out. They're not. Their names and deeds are going to be made public. So it just seems like they convicted this woman for the purposes of a cover up.
It's a kangaroo court. It's basically we have to burn somebody on effigy because we can't just kill her like we did the other guy. That will look too suspicious. And yes, I'm fully on team. Epstein not only didn't kill himself, but was assassinated because he knew too much and could actually have meaningfully unmasked everybody if he actually got to trial.
Do you think we're
Because
ever going to know the full
he
truth?
was good at information, and that makes him dangerous. The same thing that they all sought him out for, i.e., the fact that he's good at networking and dealing with information, is also the thing that put a giant red target on his back when it came time to pony up.
Do you think we're ever going to know what really, who all is involved?
Well, you have to keep in mind that even more important than money to these people, because in all honesty, they have so much money that most of it probably isn't meaningful to them at all. The thing that's more important than money to an aristocrat is clout, influence, and respectability. If anyone comes after those three things, then we actually have a problem. That's why they hate things like things that undermine their moral frameworks more so than their financial ones. Because you say, you know, you have the money that most stockbrokers make, and they're still going to be set for life. But you undermine the edifice of social justice as a concept, or say that you know your moral ideology isn't welcome in our subculture, and that makes them look like the moralistic Puritan authoritarians that they are, and then they have to come up with the idea that maybe they're not the plucky underdogs in the Dead Poet Society movie they have playing in their heads anymore. Maybe they've become the very thing that they fear, and they can't deal with the idea that they aren't the rebels anymore. That's why it's
I mean,
all based on
House,
subversion and
if you're
go
going to
ahead.
a White House correspondence dinner, you are not a rebel.
But if we use the power against the institution itself, then that surely means that we're still the rebels right now. Yeah, I'm going to save all of y'all some trouble. I don't know. I don't care how many Silicon Valley pricks, I don't care how many Silicon Valley pricks vehemently hate capitalism and use all their financial resources to undermine capitalism, you're still the aristocrats. And in fact, all this changes is it changes you from aristocrats who actually might be held accountable by the principle of noblesse oblige to self-hating aristocrats who don't want to be aristocrats and therefore can't be held accountable because they don't want to be aristocrats. That's all that does.
Uh, let's talk about some of the media's more bigger outright lies. Do you remember summer of 2020?
Oh, doesn't everyone?
I mean, fiery but mostly peaceful protests. I mean,
For 6 months, and one of which involved a almost month-long apartheid of a space around the Capitol Hill of Seattle.
yeah. I mean, if something's on fire, fire is the opposite of peace. I don't think you can call it mostly peaceful if there's
Fire is
actual
the most
building on fire
chaotic
behind
of
you.
the elements, basically. I mean, fucking hell. There's a reason why Prometheus in the myth of Prometheus giving fire to man gave man fire to balance out the gifts given to all the other animals, because compared to claws or strength or teeth or whatever, fire is a fucking meta breaking game hack. And it's always been a meta breaking game hack no matter where it's employed. You yell fire in a crowded theater, there's a reason why everyone instinctively runs the other fucking way.
Just and it wasn't just one fire. Like you could see videos of like almost entire neighborhoods going up. There was one I forget where, I believe it was Wisconsin, where they burned down an entire car lot. Like you could see husks of burnt out cars just everywhere. It was terrible, and people died.
Yeah, no, it was
People
it
lost
was
their
a
lives in the
it
course of these riots.
was a systematic use of fire as a means of political theater, basically.
And
Several
none
of
of this,
which happened behind CNN anchors as they were trying to cover the incidents in question, and they still carried water for them because they share the same worldview.
yeah, none of the people in the media, none of the politicians cared until they realized that it might affect their chance in the election. That's when the narrative shifted.
And even then, it didn't shift that much. It was like, well, I understand that they had good intentions, but they went a little bit too far. Yeah, no, it only is conceivable as good intentions because you share the same worldview and the same axioms in common. And a lot of the media, a lot of the establishment media, admire the Antifa people as brave freedom fighters in the front line of the culture war.
Yeah, but Antifa hates the media. They don't like it when they're being recorded. They don't
Yes,
like it
but the
when
media
people go
also
up and ask
secretly hate
questions.
the the media also hates them. It's the thing I was talking about earlier with the Silicon Valley smucks like Zuckerberg and Dorsey and Bezos and so on. They all grew up in a time when it was cool to hate capitalism, so they think to themselves, if I use the tools of capitalism to undermine capitalism, that makes me a good guy, right? Yeah, no. And just because you ally yourself with the people who hate you, media, doesn't mean you're therefore the good guys. It just means that everyone involved is very, very confused and very, very much up their own ass because they can afford to be because they're aristocrats.
You know, I've mentioned before about the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Let's talk about how the media is covering the government right now because it's it's like they're living in a different reality.
It's a very stark contrast to 5 minutes ago, relatively speaking, when literally everything he did was done wrong because he wasn't the approved candidate.
Yet these people looked for literally every single opportunity they could to attack Donald Trump over anything, including things that weren't even actually his fault or he didn't even actually do.
Yeah,
Like,
that actually weren't reasonable or valid criticisms. But honestly, I would prefer a media that did that to every president consistently, because then at least there would be some opposition between the media and the rest of the cathedral. But now that the coronated, approved, chosen one is in power,
the Lich Lord has risen to power.
it's literally he can do no wrong, and we will actively avoid pressing him on any significant issue. Never mind the fact the man very obviously has Alzheimer's or some other variant of dementia, and has pretty much since the campaign started.
I mean, it's blindingly obvious to anybody who actually watches the man's speeches. I mean, he will take very long pauses. He will mumble and fuddle his words. He will start talking about random things that have nothing to do with what he was just asked or what he was just talking about. And the thing is, the media covers it up. They'll say, "Oh, Joe Biden said we really need to take a harder stance on blah 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 blah." Meanwhile, he took 5 minutes to answer a question and started talking about potatoes or some shit.
And can we just talk about how often he looks dazed and confused?
It's like he
Because
doesn't know where he is.
irrespective of anything else, that is symptom number one to tell when an elderly relative is getting on in years, is when they don't know where they are or what they're doing there.
And it's not just, this is very frustrating for me. They will cover up not only just the things he says, but like the effect that he's having on the country, like inflation, like the Afghanistan withdrawal. I mean, they didn't really cover up that much because you can't cover that up. It's too big. But they would often say that it was Trump idea to get out of Afghanistan. Like there was no way it could have been done any better when it could have, and anybody with two brain cells to rub together to make a synaptic charge could have done it better.
It
But
also could have been done like 20 years ago, but never the fuck mind.
yeah, and they're covering him for on inflation, the rising of gas prices, the jobs reports. Uh, I just want to put this out for everybody. The jobs that Joe Biden are quote unquote making, he's not making these jobs. These are just jobs that are slowly coming back after being locked
They're
down.
being allowed to return to normal.
Yeah, and even then, it's not a whole bunch of jobs because a lot of places are shut down for good because they were forced to lock down and couldn't make any money and couldn't afford to keep their
Yeah,
location.
unless you happen to be a corporation, you can't just shut down business for a year and expect to still have a business at the end.
You know, wages are getting a little bit higher, but it's not keeping track with inflation. And nobody in the media is really taking these issues seriously. Like
Yeah,
these would be the issues that you would seriously go after a president for. That these should be the things that sink his presidency, and they are. But it's not because of the press; it's because that people are feeling these things, and nobody can really ignore it anymore.
and instead, because we are a men's issues show, I feel it's necessary to point this out. What sorts of things do they spend time doing the expose, investigative journalism, hit piece routine on? And a large part of that answer is anyone who's anti-feminist and anyone who so much as breathes the heresy that maybe men's rights should be a thing. How many times have the International Conference on Men's Issues been treated like a fucking cult meeting, or something akin to like Jehovah's Witnesses or the Westboro Baptist Church? How many times have female men's rights advocates like Karen Strawn and Allison Tiemann literally been vilified and demonized in every media that could get their hands on it? Uh, I mean, hell, this is slightly out of what we're talking about today, but the Mary Sue literally committed libel against the Honey Badgers, and somehow they still lost the case, even though the judge agreed with them in all but the sentencing or conclusion period of the trial. And they can't
That's
appeal it yet because Allison is banned from the country for 5 years.
right. That is important. Speaking, and I want to. There's one particular instance that I want to talk about with that. Uh, Jordan Peterson being interviewed by Kathy Newman.
Oh, so much
She
nostalgia.
literally tried to take everything the man said out of context and twist it to make him sound like the most sexist, misogynistic person alive. And
Yes,
nothing
because
he was saying was like an insult or a put down on women. He was just merely stating basically the way things are. And
yeah, evolutionary psychology exists, and general psychological predispositions exist, and they account for these variables better than conspiratorial theories like the patriarchy or the wage gap do. That is the TLDR version. Evolutionary psychology is a better indicator for this behavior than patriarchal conspiracy theories about the wage gap. That's the long and the short of it. That's as far as they got because Kathy Newman was so um, was so busy arguing with the villain that she wished Jordan Peterson was, that she didn't actually hear a blind thing that actually came out of the man's mouth. And not for nothing, but the media does this all the fucking time. They
she tried to
it's
set so many traps for him. And honestly, if he hadn't been as intelligent as he was, somebody who probably wasn't as smart would have fallen for a couple of them.
yeah, but fortunately, Dr. Peterson is rather composed. Even though I might disagree with him on a couple of things here and there, he's capable of having these sorts of debates, and he does understand the thing I was talking about earlier with they prepared for one test, not the test they're actually giving. It's exactly the same reason why we can in all sincerity refer to Richard Spencer as CNN contributor Richard Spencer, because they keep calling him, not because they actually like him or anything, but because he is the villain they wish they were fighting. That
Yes,
that
that's another
that's
thing.
the
When they
argument they're
call people
prepared
for
for.
when they call people for interviews, they don't call the most intelligent people that they can find. They either call people who already agree with them or people who they can lead around by the nose and people who will take the bait.
Or people who represent the world as they wish it was rather than the world as it is. For example, they keep calling Roosh V and people like Roosh V men's rights advocates when they're pickup artists. And instead of talking to somebody like Karen Strawn about men's rights or men's rights issues, or Allison Tiemann or Hannah Wallen, or how even Kathy J probably would be a decent expert on the men's rights movement at this point. Instead of talking to any of those people, they talk to Roosh V, or they talk to some expert like, and I use that term in the loosest possible air quotes, like Dave Futrell, who makes a living researching, quote unquote, the men's rights movement instead of actually participating in it. And that's the thing. They treat men's rights as a concept in the same way that people who study Jehovah's Witness or the Westboro Baptist Church or or cults like those people treat cults, i.e., we can't actually talk to people within this subculture because these people are fucking crazy cultists. but we can talk to people who've made it their business to understand these people because they must surely be right, derp. Never mind that they can't ever actually cite any of the things they say,
Yeah,
and most of it is just conjecture.
Ed Brewer says in the comments they used to put Ben on. They don't do that anymore. Now, I know, Dalton, that you don't necessarily like Ben Shapiro, but you cannot deny that the man, one, is intelligent, and two, is a very skilled debater.
Yeah, he's at least capable of having these arguments. Now, granted, I think that if journalism worked as journalism should work, and instead of Chris Wallace and the Cuomo brothers, we could have like Andrew Yang or some of the people that work for Project Veritas as journalists, or at best case would be Tim Pool. I think Tim Pool deserves his own show on basically every network. That would be a good thing for all parties involved. But
Yeah, there's one thing you mentioned there that I want to talk on: the Cuomo brothers.
oh god,
When Chris Cuomo was interviewing his brother, then Governor Andrew Cuomo, that pissed me off so much because the
it
one
was
thing that
like
I
a
learned from the
comedic version
newspaper
of The
journalists when I was a
Godfather.
kid was that you are not allowed to interview anybody that you are personally involved with.
Yeah,
Ever. That is a big
objectivity,
no in
motherfucker. You
journalism.
speak it. It's yeah, and not for nothing, but it looked like a comedic parody of The Godfather, because they both apparently have this hyperinflated sense of themselves in their heads where they think they're fucking mafiosos or some shit.
I mean,
To the point that um, Chris Cuomo famously got rather triggered when he realized he might be the Fredo of the family.
yeah, that meltdown, which was caught on video, I believe, was hilarious.
And I almost feel for him because I can see a situation where he is the Fredo of the family because number one, his brother is a governor, which is inherently more respectable than a newscaster. And number two, it was probably
I
something to
mean,
do
not
with the
anymore.
family connections that let him get that position in the first place. So he probably feels rather inadequate about constantly relying on his brother's or his family's legacy rather than his own merits. So he probably does have this deep-seated fear that he might be the Fredo of the family. No wonder it triggered him.
I mean, he was a respected governor. Emphasis on
Okay.
was.
Yeah.
And that's another thing. Like during the pandemic, the media was simping for this guy so damn hard it was disgusting.
Yeah.
Like,
President Cuomo articles were a dime a dozen there for a bit.
meanwhile, the people who actually lived in the state of New York, a lot of them were vehemently angry because COVID patients were being put in nursing homes, and that was causing the virus to spread in the nursing homes, where the most vulnerable people in the population are the elderly, and people were dying. Like lots of people died because of the policies of Andrew Cuomo, and the media treated him like he was king of the world.
My ex-boyfriend was a male nurse who lived in New York City during the COVID lockdowns. The things he told me in the interim of our relationship about exactly how Cuomo fucked everything up were startling in their vitriol.
What he said.
It was just like every time I asked him about work, it was just of an endless torrent of how incompetent it was being handled and how much he hated Cuomo. We didn't talk about it often because I generally just avoided the subject because I wanted to, be romantic and shit. So I didn't want to. I didn't want to remind him of how awful his job was, and at the time it was awful because he was a male nurse during the COVID thing. So yeah, but a couple
Yeah,
the few times we talked about it, he was very very angry about the whole thing.
I can only imagine. I mean, having to be the one that actually has to treat the patients and go in and deal with everything that's happening, I can imagine it being incredibly frustrating.
Yeah, and he had a specialization. He was a home nurse. He wasn't a he didn't work in a hospital. He actually went around and visited people in their homes um that were too incapacitated to get out into the world. So I imagine it was even worse for him.
You, let's I just want to mention this a moment. Though we talked about how the media treated Andrew Cuomo during COVID. Let's talk about how they treated Donald Trump during COVID, because the stark contrast to these two were it was absolutely ridiculous. They treated Donald Trump as if he was personally going in and just injecting people with the virus. And he's the president. There's only so much he can do. It's a virus. Like it's not like it's people coming into the southern border, which they're also ignoring. Um, it's like something that you can't really stop because there's no really way to stop it. You can minimize it as best as possible, but there's not a whole lot people can really do without treatment or I'm not even gonna say vaccines. Um, and also the way that he left it to the governors, where he would provide them support as they needed it, that was really the only way to go. With
One of
he
one
can't
of my
really
favorite
make a
comedians.
unilateral policy, a unilateral health policy for all 50 states, because the conditions in each state are vastly different. That if you try to do it top down, it's not going to work.
One of my favorite comedic moments in the entire early part of the pandemic was he's Trump said it's fine, we'll get a handle on it, nobody panic. And people pitch that as, and in particular, I think I saw Kyle Kalinske pitching that as he's minimizing the importance of the virus. No, you morons, he's trying to make sure people don't fucking panic, because it, it's better to say things are fine, we're going to get through this, than it is to say this is the worst thing ever, everybody panic. Because if you said the second part of that, then it's going to be Mad Max here in about 5 minutes. But if you say, everybody hunker down, we'll get through it, then at least people have a sense of reason and orderliness to them.
And people really did go insane, man. And I honestly blame the media, because they wanted COVID to be the thing that destroyed Trump, and they pushed it so damn hard. Like,
They wanted it to be the new Spanish flu, basically.
yeah. And did you see the Project Veritas video of when they were basically catfishing that producer from CNN? He basically said that we wanted the COVID death counter on the screen to scare people.
Because we have to be the responsible adults in the room who oversee the plebs and the children. Because it's our job to make sure people believe what we want them to. I mean, what they should believe. I mean, yeah. Well,
And
I hate the goddamn elitism of it all. The we know better than you, so don't you dare question us or offer alternative worldviews thing.
these the damage that this whole thing is doing to the public is extremely concerning, because people have literally gone insane. Like, people will get attacked for not wearing a mask. People will like be attacked for, you know, saying that they haven't gotten the vaccine, or that they may even just have some concerns about the vaccine. And God forbid you actually say any issues that you might have actually experienced taking the vaccine, because then you're just a conspiracy theorist.
And then of course there's the other issue of this is making it much harder to treat other illnesses of any kind. Like I had a friend who about 2 weeks ago, he got what was very obviously to him and myself when he explained it to me, a case of strep throat. And he calls in to the doctor's office to telehealth report that he has strep throat. And the first thing out of the doctor's mouth is, "Oh, I understand you think you have COVID." And according to my friend, it was at this exact moment he realized he was fucked. Because no matter what my friend said in relation to his obvious case of strep throat, the doctor kept trying to say, "But it really is COVID, but it really is COVID, but COVID sometimes has symptoms very similar to this, that, and the other, or sometimes it doesn't present with any symptoms at all." And he literally made my friend go down the list of symptoms and check each one off that he did not have of COVID. And then when my friend fired back with symptoms of the very obvious strep throat that he had, the doctor had to find some way of post hoc rationalizing that that might actually be a COVID symptom. And this apparently went on for like 2 hours.
I never really understood the fear, because we've had viruses before, like bird flu, swine flu, SARS, West Nile. Those
Well,
have
but like
been.
even when the lockdown first started, I was sitting there like, this is the lamest apocalypse ever, because it was still, everyone was fine, everything was cushy. Some people were panicking unnecessarily about toilet paper for whatever goddamn reason, but for the most part, it was just people sitting in their houses, chilling for, 3 to 6 months, and everything was fine. So if this is the most apocalyptic that the 21st century gets, I'd say we're doing fine. Considering the last time a Spanish flu-like thing happened, it was a massive thing that lasted years and killed so many people that there were literally dead people in the street.
There's one thing I want to talk about. This will probably be the last thing. The media is bought. The media is owned by corporations. It used to be that there existed a bunch of small media companies that were mostly independent. Now, the vast majority of news outlets are owned by what, three big corporations.
Well, yeah, it's well, even further than that, you could go so far as to say basically all kinds of media are owned by all but five corporations. I mean, you've got Alphabet, which is the parent company of Google. You've got Viacom. You've got I forget the other one, but
Disney,
oh, huh?
Disney.
Well, no, Disney is owned by a overseeing company too. I don't remember exactly which one though, is the problem. But the long and the short of it is, yeah, there are five companies that basically control all the media you see, whether it's fictional media, whether it's news media, whether it's educational media, whether it's everything from stage to screen to the small screen to everything in between. It is basically all of these five companies. And that totally doesn't count as monopolizing the industry or anything, because we're smart enough to split it between the five of us. So it can't be a monopoly if there are five of us, derp.
And you will see, like, all media outlets just pushing the exact same narrative and very creepily in the exact same way. You remember that video
Even in the
compilation
case of
of,
even in the case of companies that are supposed to be oppositional to each other, like Fox and CNN and MSNBC.
yeah, MSNBC and CNN are supposed to be competing against each other, but you would never know it if you actually watch their shows.
And even Fox usually gets dragged down in the undertow too. Like they still play the diversity game, they still play the social justice game, they still play the possible collusion musical chairs that was the Trump Russia meddling collusion thing.
And it's very hard a for a normal person to sift through all that if they have no idea where to go for the truth. Like the problem with alternative media is that yeah, it's out there, but a lot of people don't know where to look.
Yeah, and then some of the, for lack of a better word, less intelligent among the populace get thrown down the conspiracy rabbit hole. And then that one person who gets thrown down the conspiracy rabbit hole every great now and again becomes representative of everyone who consumes alternative media. Because to the powers that be, saying we could be populist and libertarian instead of elitist and moralistic is just as conspiratorial as saying the earth is flat or man never walked on the moon or whatever the fuck.
Yeah. Oh yeah, this is another thing I wanted to bring up. Hunter
Hmm?
Biden's laptop. That should have been the biggest story of the 2020 election. And just to answer your question real quick, Edward, no, I do not use the Hill. Um, that story was very important, and they did a poll that showed if more people had known about it, I believe 7% would have changed their vote from Trump to Biden, which would have been the election. But
Yeah.
yeah, the mainstream media refused to cover it. They tried to bury the New York Post to first publish the story, and they didn't look into it because they said that they couldn't figure out if it was credible, quote unquote. Well, how are you going to know if it's credible if you don't look into the damn thing?
And again, I must point out that even with the Hunter Biden laptop being decentralized, they still had to, and the New York Times confessed to this, fortify the election for the greater good, quote unquote, while simultaneously accusing anyone who claims that they did such things as they admitted to, is a partisan conspiracy theorist who just loves Daddy Trump so very, very much. Couldn't possibly be that there's actual evidence. Couldn't possibly be that you admitted to it. You'd have been. It's it's insane. Even with every media institution they have at their disposal, even with every news piece of news media being essentially in the same framework, they still had to bullshit their way out of it with the greater good and admitted to it while simultaneously claiming no such thing could ever have happened. And,
Uh,
and the part of that that's baffling to me is, why did you admit to it? Like, because I could have seen a situation where if that fortification article never got published, people would have just kind of let that go and been like, okay, well, it might have happened, it might have not, but we will never really know. But then they straight up admitted to it because they considered it, like it almost felt like they wanted praise for it. Like they considered it such an unimpeachable moral good that they wanted to admit to it so everyone could come out and praise them because they're just that out of touch and locked in their own framework where
it's like a
this
child who
happened and it
smears.
was it was such an obvious good thing that you give me praise for it, won't you? Oh wait, no. Other people with other worldviews exist. How dare other people with other worldviews exist? This is forbidden.
Like a child who smears feces on the walls and then comes to say, "Look what I made."
That's exact that's exactly it. This couldn't possibly be a bad thing I'm doing, so I'll go and tell on myself because it's clearly a good thing, and I'll be regarded as a hero. Yeah, no. Only in your own worldview would that make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah, there is some, you know, good things going about though. Project Veritas seems to be on the warpath against the mainstream media. They are currently suing CNN, and they've been doing some really good exposés on CNN. Wait, they're suing the New York Times, sorry, and they're getting some really good exposés on CNN. And I don't know if you heard this, but Joy Reid from MSNBC, her show is getting canceled, and God, I freaking hate her.
Well, I mean, a better candidate might be Rachel Maddow to get her shit canceled, but I can dream. Um,
God,
be- be-
I hope Don Lemon goes down too.
yeah,
He just
speaking of people getting sued in the mainstream media, shall we talk about the Nick Sandman and Kyle Rittenhouse cases a
oh
little
God,
bit?
how could I have forgotten about those? I mean, Jesus. If
And,
you want to
and,
talk
and
about media smearing somebody, there are no two prime examples because literally everything regarding those two incidences, the media got wrong, dead wrong, and they didn't even care to wait to find out what the truth was.
yeah, because they assumed they already had the right answer because it was the answer that made sense in their worldview, and our worldview couldn't possibly ever be wrong, derp, and therefore this person who is trying to smile awkwardly and back away from this guy who's drumming in his face is in fact smiling condescendingly because we say so, because some mass conspiracy theory of white supremacy and derp. And this
Yeah,
guy
and
who very obviously was trying to be a volunteer firefighter and paramedic amateur to protect his friend's business and also the other buildings that were being burnt down to the ground and or smashed, he killed two people that were beating him with a skateboard upside the head and lunging for his gun, but never the fuck mind.
the thing is, in the case of Kyle Rittenhouse, they first reported that he shot black people. The people who killed were black, and I think some people were still reporting that even during the
Yeah,
trial.
it became such a meme that there were literal journalists on Twitter going, "I just now realized that the people that Kyle Rittenhouse shot were not black," and the reason is because in their worldview, black is not a race; it's a mentality or an ideology or a hive mind. So in their worldview, if you um, were to say, I don't support Black Lives Matter, that makes you less black than a white guy who goes, but BLM is the only true path to blackness, or some such thing.
I guess my assimilation must have failed.
Just like Milo Yiannopoulos doesn't get to be gay anymore because he says the wrong things.
But in regards to the case, like it wasn't just the race thing; they got every fact wrong. Like they said that he brought an illegal weapon across state lines. First of all, he didn't bring it across state lines. Second, it wasn't illegal because he was allowed to have it under the laws of the state. They
And
said that
third
he
of all,
crossed state
even if
lines.
he had the whole hysteria around state lines thing, here's the thing. I live in Lawrenceville, Pennsylvania, which is 15 minutes roughly away from Corning, New York. It's like 15 minutes away from the New York border. And Kyle Rittenhouse lived in Illinois, I believe, and he went to Kenosha, Wisconsin, which is like a stone's throw away from the Wisconsin-Illinois border. That's the equivalent of what happened. It'd be like if I went from Lawrenceville to Corning and somebody bitched at me for going across state lines. It's because people who live close to state lines tend to have things that require them to go from one state to the other sometimes. And
I mean,
his friend,
nobody complains when people from New Jersey go into New York.
or if people from New York wind up somehow in Philadelphia or even Hershey, nobody complains. But if Kyle Rittenhouse goes, I think it was like 45 minutes to an hour to a place where he and his friend had worked before and where he knew riots were happening that were involved. that were involving property damage and fires, given that he had at least some paramedic and firefighting training. And his friend specifically asked him to come help defend the parking lot of the place where he worked. All of a sudden, that's a massive conspiracy, even though that's entirely reasonable.
The thing is, Dalton, he never even crossed state lines in the first place. What happened was he had worked another job, stayed overnight at a friend's house, I believe. It was either a friend's house or his dad's house because his dad lived there. Anyway, he stayed overnight, and then the next day he went over to the to help out with the shop and cleanup and stuff. So he never even crossed state lines to begin with. He was already in the state.
Yeah, but even if he had, what I'm saying is the fear mongering over he crossed state lines is nonsensical.
Absolutely. And in the case of Nick Sandman, they basically treated him as he was like a KKK member, and he
Yeah, Richard
did
Spencer
nothing
Jr.
wrong.
basically.
Like he and his classmates were at this location because they had gone to a rally, and it was a school event. And then these guys from, I believe, the Black Hebrew Israelites came up and started harassing them. And then this Native American group came up and started singing and basically walked up to them and beat a drum in their face. And they treated him like he was a bad guy. He did nothing. And they asked, some people said, well, why didn't he just leave? Well, first of all, he shouldn't freaking have to. He didn't do anything wrong. And second of all, he's an underage kid at a school event. Like, that's where they were supposed to meet, like, for the school. He can't just leave. Like, where
Yeah,
are they going to
he was
find
on a
him?
field trip with his classmates or some shit, and
Yeah.
they were waiting for the teacher or whomever, and then the Black Hebrew Israelites and this one, Native American interest group saw them and were like, "How dare you wear those red hats?" Basically, and then the rest is history.
Yeah, I think if we're going to talk about these particular cases, I think we also have to talk about the reverse. Juicy Smouillet, the French gay black actor who faked a hate crime, and everybody in the media just ran with it. Like, this was one of the biggest stories in the
Because it
country.
made sense within their worldview, and the worldview is all that matters. Derp.
Like, this story made no damn sense, but he was getting all kinds of interviews. He was like crying on camera. Like, yeah, journalists talking
Social
about, oh,
justice
look how
martyr,
racist
basically.
America is. Like, this was basically what people were using as an example of how racist and homophobic America is, and it's fake.
Yeah, and whilst we're here, we might as well flip the other side of that coin as well. Compare this to how everyone reacted when Dave Chappelle did what he always does and told edgy jokes, and
Yeah.
how the people who were in favor of him were framed.
Good. Well, to be fair, that is the most of us.
Yeah, but I'm talking about the people that actually went to um, Netflix headquarters to actually counter protest the people that were morally outraged over Dave Chappelle. One of whom I know for a fact was basically a milquetoast centrist entertainment news guy who was literally just saying we like jokes. And
It's just oh yeah, I remember the guy you're talking about, but the only people who complain about Dave Chappelle's special is people who have never watched Dave Chappelle's special, and we know this. Um, George Takei, the actor who played Sulu on Star Trek, he made a comment about Dave Chappelle jokes regarding the trans community, about how if he made jokes about the Jewish community, nobody would be laughing. And I'm like, okay, clearly you didn't watch the special because he made Jewish jokes earlier in the special. Like, he
nobody
made
batted
those
an
jokes.
eye because Jewish jokes are fine, I guess.
Like, even Jewish people were laughing at the Jewish jokes.
And let's also be perfectly honest about this. Is there a Jewish comedian alive who doesn't get at least 60% of the material from the Jewish stereotype jokes? From Mel Brooks to Bill Maher to Woody Allen to everyone in between. Because
Maybe Jon Stewart.
no, he gets a significant portion of his jokes from the I'm I'm a Jew card as well. Like I remember a couple years ago there was a case where Trump, pre-presidency, got into it on Twitter with Jon Stewart, or at least Jon Stewart's intern, and um, Jon Stewart was talking about it on stage once, and he said, "Oh, I think he's trying to let people know I'm a Jew." But doesn't my face do that? So yeah, is there a Jewish comedian alive today that has never pulled the Jew card for a joke?
Not one that I could necessarily name, but you know, it's absolutely ridiculous because you know comedians have been making fun of literally everybody like for as long as comedy has existed. I mean, going back to court jesters making fun of nobility.
I mean, for fuck's sake, it's literally the anti-dentite meme from Seinfeld. Does this offend you as a Jewish person? No, it offends me as a comedian.
Uh, these the media has so many problems that we could probably be here for another hour. But um, there is stuff I need to do.
We'll be spinning off sequels to this one for the next couple. Don't you worry, guys.
Yeah, definitely. But it is Sunday, and I do have work tomorrow, so I'm gonna end it here. Dalton, do you have any last words or comments about the state of our media, such as it is?
The fact that we have to refer to it as the media instead of journalism is all the indicator you could ever possibly need. We need less of the media and more journalism again.
The only thing I want to say is that the moment that the media decided they were a class of people separate from everybody else is when the problems began.
Yeah. But
All right.
like I said earlier, the times they are a change. And it's going to be a rude awakening for those in the aristocracy when the peasants realize that it's just the same as it was in the French Revolution. Because I'm not saying we should get out the guillotines, but I'm saying that I wouldn't be super sad if we did.
All right. I'm gonna end the stream, but before I do, I just want to say to all the journalists out there losing their jobs, I mean, hey, you can always learn the code. Um, I've been Mystery.
I've been Dalton Mortimer, the Authenticator. We have been the Duality of Man, and cheers, guys.
See ya.